Hi, Joe Chiccarelli here at the wonderful, beautiful La Fabrique studios in the south of France. I just finished another fun week with Mix with the Masters. Had a great time here, always great time. But this seminar especially was really, really a lot of fun. We have a lot of questions here from the soccer fans all around the world, so we'll get right to them. First question is from Carlos Cordoba. His question is, what are, from my perspective, the most common problems to resolve in a mix, and how do I address each one of them? To me, a mix is really, really about shaping it with the character, the tone that you want, but more importantly, getting the message, the singer, the emotion carried through the mix. So that's all about the vocal. So to me, the vocal sound is the one most important element. So I really spend a lot of time trying to make sure there's plenty of room for the singer to breathe in the track, that the singer sounds big and important and clear and emotional. I try hard to get other elements in the track not to crowd the singer. I leave a lot of room. I shape the bottom end carefully in the track to not overshadow the singer, rolling off frequencies that clash with the singer. I also make sure that the singer doesn't have a lot of harsh mid-range. I try to just soften the mid-range so it makes it easy for you to listen. And that's done sometimes with compression, sometimes with EQ, or a combination of both. But for me, the real important thing is getting room in the mix for the singer. So when I start my mix, I start with all the elements in the track and build things around the vocalist. I don't spend days on my kick drum sound. It's basically just one element in the mix. So I take a very overall approach every step of the way in the mix. Hope that helps, Carlos. Okay, question number 2 is from Fred Mostachi, and he asks, with my experience with Frank Zappa, how do I view him as a producer, and are there tips that I learned from him that I still incorporate today? Well, the one and the most important thing I learned from Frank Zappa was to always be bold, to be fearless, to take chances, take risks, to go out on the limb, be unconventional, to create records that are exciting and unique and never conservative and safe. Obviously, you know his music and you know he lived to excite people and to challenge people, and it's something that I really try to bring to every record I work on. Okay, this one's from Dead Man Needle. He says, your discography is filled with great records with artists who have very distinctive qualities of their own. Any tips on how to encourage artists to be more confident in what makes them unique? That's a really, really good question. I think it's the producer's job, and even to a certain extent the engineer's job, to be supportive and encouraging and enthusiastic with the artists that they work with, to really, really indeed bring out their best. And sometimes it's even a matter of sitting down with them and talking to them and telling them in a very, very supportive and complimentary way what you feel their strengths are. And I think also you have the right and the job to present their weakness to them. I think that helps them. But I really do think encouraging somebody, if it's, trying to come up with a guitar solo in a style that they're not used to doing, I think you need to push them and get them to try things. I think you need to show them new sounds. I think you need to let them explore things. And, we all have our comfort zones, and we all rely on certain techniques and certain styles. But I think it's when you go out on a limb and try new things that you really, really come up with new and interesting and exciting music. So I think it's your job, especially as a producer, that you always, every step of the process, encourage the artist to take a risk. Okay, the next question is from Fabio Yafisco. He says, hi Joe, if you use some, what is your favorite plugin for mixing guitars? And what also, this is I guess the second part of the question, what is your favorite mic pre combination for recording bass amp? Okay, well, guitars, there's a lot of plugins I use. I always tend to filter the bottom end on guitars. For that, I usually just simply use the Digi Design EQ1 or EQ3 as it's called now, and 6 or 12 dB roll off, and I'll find the point in the mix where the guitar still retains its fullness and quality, but I get rid of the frequencies that are crowding the bass perhaps, or some other instruments in the track, piano. That's my favorite plugin, but I also use things like Stomp. I love the Stomp Box plugins in Waves for guitar. I'll tend to use those for delay effects, chorus effects, fuzz effects. I love the guitar box Stomp. It's called Tone. I use that a lot for shaping the mid-range. Gives it a lot of character. So those are probably my two. And of course, 1176, UA 1176 is to me the best guitar compressor ever made. That's probably what I always use as an 1176 plugin on a guitar. Okay, second part of the question is favorite mic pre combination for recording bass amp. You know, most of the music I do tends to be rock and roll, and for me, I always want preamps that are fat, have a lot of tone. So I rely on old Neve modules, 1073s, 1081s, 31105s. Those are my favorite. I love the tone of the preamp. It's rich, it's fat, it's full, but it's got a bit of grit on it. Also, the EQ on those is so broad and so warm. Certainly love APIs too. They're punchy, more aggressive than a Neve, and when the bass amp needs a little bit more help, where a Neve sometimes can be soft, API will be much more alive and aggressive. So those are probably my first go-to choices. Trident preamps are really great. Daking preamps are really great for that purpose. But those, I would probably go old school first, especially if it were rock music. This one's from Taylor Tatch. This is pretty fun. Taylor assisted me on some sessions in Dallas some years ago. So he says, when I worked with you, I remember pulling up your drums, a total of 8 tracks. With all the faders at Unity, the tones and balance were perfect to my ears. He's very kind. I seem to remember the sessions, and they needed more help than that, but he's very kind. Anyways, he asks, how many mics roughly did you use to get your bust tracks working well together during tracking to commit to a very small track count? Do you commit to a fair bit of compression? Yes, yes, and yes. No, I probably, for those sessions, they were bigger rock sessions. I probably used about 16 microphones that were bounced down to a total of 8 tracks. So maybe I used more than that. I can't really remember. But I might have as many as 6 microphones on the room. I'll bust those to 2 tracks. I'll have an in, an out, and a sub mic on the kick, which will go to 1 track. I'll have 2 snare top mics and 1 bottom mic. They'll go to 1 track. My toms, usually I mic the tops, but if I mic the top and bottom, they go to 1 for the floor, 1 for the rack tom. Overheads are usually just 1 mic or 2 mics, depending on the style of music. Hi-hat, 1 mic. I might have some other specialized room mics to add distortion or kind of trashy mid-range character. But I always commit. I get the picture of the sound that I want for the record, and I commit to that just so, as Taylor says, every time I bring up the tracks, that's the sound. It's always there, and then I build the rest of the record around that sound that I've created on the tracking days. In terms of compression, yeah, there's probably a fair amount of compression on the room mics, especially for a big rock sound. If I'm doing something that's more pop or certainly jazz, there would be very little compression. Might have a little bit of compression on the snare drum or perhaps the overheads, but not too much. But that's about it. But certainly EQ, compression, distortion, whatever effects, they're there on the first day of tracking, and that is the sound. Brandon Bear, he says, I love the big, I'm getting a lot of drum compliments today. This is nice. He says, I love the big, fat 3D rock drum sounds you were able to get with bands like Raconteurs, and especially Ronnie Vannucci's Big Talk record. Could you give me some insight as to your process and how tracking and mixing stages play into this? Well, in the case of both Raconteurs and Big Talk, we really kind of had a concept of what the drums should sound like. In the case of Big Talk, Ronnie wanted something that was big and alive and modern at the same time. We actually blended in some Simmons drum module sounds with the snare drum to give it a little bit more drum machine-like quality at times. With the Raconteurs, it was a much simpler setup, still powerful, but very, very simple miking setup. Probably Ronnie's setup was 14, 16 microphones, where Raconteurs may have been 10 microphones. Patrick plays a much more old-style rock and roll, and Ronnie is a much more aggressive modern drummer. You know, in both cases, those are world-class drummers who know how to get great drum sounds. They tune their drums well, they hit them well, they're consistent with their hits, both in terms of where they hit the drum, the velocity, never digging into a kick drum too much or hitting a cymbal too loud. That's half the battle. You have a good drummer, you're going to get a good drum sound. In terms of mixing, I'm always going to have some parallel compression on the drums. Might be one stereo compressor, could be one stereo compressor for punch, one for tone, couple of mono ones up the middle that will add attack. It's different for every record. In terms of those records, they may have had a combination of 2 or 3 compressors. Okay, this next one's from German Gutierrez Ross. He says, Dear Joe Chiccarelli, thank you for sharing your knowledge. You're welcome. I've noticed a lot of respected engineers are now mixing in the box because of recalls. They also say that Pro Tools 10 and 11 and many of the plugins sound as good as analog. How do you mix currently, and what's your thought on this? Well, I absolutely agree. Since the switch to Pro Tools 10, the tone is so much better. It's different from analog. It's always going to be different from analog. Analog has a sound, a character all unto itself, and it's a separate thing. Pro Tools 10 and even Pro Tools 11 is, again, another improvement, especially with new converters. The HDIO sounds amazing. There's many, many other great converters out there on the market, Auroras, Prisms, etc. So that's a choice, but I do feel the software itself does sound better. And AAX plugins sound fantastic. Ever since Avid put out the channel strip, that's a fantastic compressor EQ. So digital is really coming into its own now. I think those conversations of analog versus digital are long history, and they're about the way you choose to record, not because one sonically is better than the other. In terms of how I mix, it really depends on the project. Unfortunately, sometimes it depends on the budget. But most of the time, I'm still mixing a combination of digital, meaning in the box, and outside the box, analog on a big console. I'll do much of my pre-mixing, because as you know, many pop records now have 100, 120 tracks. So basically, I'm creating my own stems within Pro Tools or my own submixes within Pro Tools, and I'm breaking them out to an analog console of perhaps a maximum of 32 faders, maybe 8 for drums, 4 for guitars, couple for bass, 4 for background vocals, couple for lead vocals, etc. And I'm using a lot of plugins for especially shaping. I feel like I get tone from the analog console, but I get detail work and corrective work done in the box. I automate plugins all the time to perhaps compress just one section of a song, or take out muddiness on a vocal just for one word, or fix a pop key. So I'm doing a lot of automating in Pro Tools, and my automation on the console are really fader moves in combination with much of my balance that's preset within Pro Tools. I might have 16 tracks of guitar with moves in Pro Tools, and then I may do some general moves on the analog desk. So it's a kind of best of both worlds for me. Okay, this next one is from Jose Sabin. He asks, what would be my advice for young mixing engineers who are focusing on all different types of genres? And would it be good for that engineer to work in different recording studios or have his own personal home setup? I think working in different styles of music is the best thing anybody can do. I think you learn lots of different tricks, lots of different perspectives. I think that's so important. I would encourage you to one day work on jazz, one day work on heavy metal, next day work on some traditional folk music. I think it really helps you. You tend to bring something from that one aesthetic into what you do in a different genre, and I think it's very, very, very healthy. In terms of working in different studios, absolutely. Getting to know different acoustics in a room, how to mic things. Some studios you have to mic things closely. Some have better rooms. You can incorporate more of the room sound. Having a personal studio, always a helpful thing these days with budgets cut back. People are doing things very inexpensively to be able to mix at home in the box, or even to go home and tune a vocal. All those things are pluses. The other good thing about working in different studios is you get to see how other people operate, and that's something that you don't see when you're working all by yourself at home. You get into, you can easily get into a rut, so to speak. You can keep working a certain way and don't have fresh perspectives. So seeing how other engineers and producers work, I think, is a big plus. I was very fortunate when I first started in a major studio that every day it would be a different artist and a different producer and a different engineer. So not only did I get to see many different styles of music, I got to see many different approaches to those styles of music. So that was a great education for me. This next question is from Ronnie Morgan. He says, do you use multiband compression? And on what sources do multiband compressors work the best? I do like multiband compression. I don't use it often. I do sometimes use it on a stereo mix. I love the 3-band Tube Tech compressor. I think it has a beautiful tone, and I think being able to not compress the bottom end too much, but compress the mids is fantastic. If I'm not using a multiband compressor for my stereo mix, I probably would use a lot of side chain filtering. So in other words, the same thing. I wouldn't allow my bass to trigger the compressor too much. I'd like it to just keep the mids intact with a little bit of compression on the low end. I've also used multiband compressors with great luck for piano and acoustic guitar, especially acoustic guitar. Again, sort of tailoring the mids so when the guy digs in, it keeps that under control, doesn't get too scratchy. Piano, sometimes certain notes pop out, and that's really, really helpful to have a multiband compressor there. Those are probably my favorite uses. Well, I think that wraps it up. I hope that answered your multiband compression question. It's been a fun week at La Fabrique as always, and looking forward to seeing everybody here next time, and send in your questions. See ya.